It began with a quiet exchange behind palace doors, one so sensitive that even senior aides were ordered to leave the room. What started as a routine review of royal assets quickly became something far more explosive. By nightfall, whispers were spreading through royal corridors that Prince William had uncovered something connected to Queen Camilla and a collection of jewels that were never supposed to leave the shadows of history. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At first, almost nobody outside the palace understood why a seemingly ordinary meeting had triggered such an unusual level of secrecy. Senior officials were summoned with little notice. Schedules were quietly rearranged. Conversations that normally flowed freely through royal offices suddenly stopped whenever certain names were mentioned. Something significant was unfolding behind the scenes, and those closest to the monarchy could feel the tension growing with every passing hour. What had begun as an internal review was rapidly becoming a matter capable of shaking long-standing assumptions about royal inheritance, privilege, and responsibility. According to growing whispers from within royal circles, Prince William had been presented with a series of documents connected to assets once associated with the Queen Mother. These were not routine records buried in forgotten archives. They concerned possessions that carried immense symbolic value, treasures that represented decades of royal history and family tradition. As advisors examined the paperwork, attention reportedly focused on a collection of jewels protected under a private trust arrangement. The existence of the trust was not the surprise. What startled those reviewing the material was the increasingly complicated question of who truly controlled those jewels, and whether the original intentions behind the trust were still being respected. As discussions intensified, uncertainty began spreading through the highest levels of the royal household. Legal experts were reportedly consulted. Courtiers exchanged concerned messages behind closed doors. Every answer seemed to create two new questions. The language contained within the trust documents appeared clear in some places, frustratingly open to interpretation in others. Those ambiguities transformed what should have been a straightforward review into something far more delicate. Suddenly, individuals who had expected a quiet administrative process found themselves navigating a growing controversy with implications reaching deep into the heart of the monarchy. Then came the development that changed the atmosphere entirely. Queen Camilla's name reportedly began surfacing during internal discussions. At first, it appeared only in passing references. But as more records were examined and more questions were raised, attention increasingly turned toward her connection to the collection. Nobody seemed eager to make accusations. Nobody appeared willing to speak openly. Yet the silence itself became revealing. Palace insiders reportedly sensed that a line had been crossed between routine administration and a potentially explosive family dispute. By the end of the day, secrecy had settled over royal circles like a heavy cloud. Conversations became guarded. Speculation intensified. Even experienced observers who had witnessed countless palace dramas sensed that this situation felt different. Beneath the surface lay a story involving legacy, duty, influence, and a royal promise that some believed should never have been questioned. And as Prince William continued examining the growing mystery, it became increasingly clear that the real story had not yet begun. But uncovering the jewels was only the beginning, because their history revealed a royal promise that stretched back generations. Long before William ever reviewed those files, the jewels had already become part of one of the monarchy's most carefully guarded legacies. They were never simply ornaments. They represented loyalty, sacrifice, and private trust established to protect the crown from future disputes. To understand why the discovery sent such shockwaves through royal circles, it is necessary to go back decades to a time when the Queen Mother occupied a unique place within the monarchy. Throughout her life, she became the guardian of countless traditions, preserving symbols of continuity during some of the most difficult chapters in modern royal history. Among the treasures associated with her legacy was a remarkable collection of jewels, pieces that carried far greater meaning than their financial value could ever measure. Each item was tied to important moments, family milestones, and generations of royal service. They were reminders of endurance during times of uncertainty, symbols of stability when the institution faced pressure from both within and beyond palace walls. As years passed, the significance of the collection only grew. These were not assets viewed as personal rewards or private luxuries. Instead, they came to represent something much larger than any individual family member. They reflected a sense of duty that stretched across generations, connecting past monarchs to future heirs. Palace insiders often described such collections as living pieces of royal history, entrusted temporarily to one generation before being passed carefully to the next. That belief shaped how the jewels were viewed and, more importantly, how they were protected. It was this concern for preservation that reportedly led to the creation of a private trust designed to safeguard the collection. The arrangement was intended to remove uncertainty and prevent future conflicts over ownership. By placing the jewels within a structured framework, those responsible hoped to ensure that personal interests would never outweigh institutional responsibility. The trust was said to contain specific conditions governing how the collection could be managed, who could access it, and under what circumstances decisions could be made regarding its future. These provisions were not merely administrative details. They reflected a broader effort to shield an important royal legacy from changing family dynamics and shifting political realities. Over time, those conditions became deeply embedded within royal expectations. The understanding was simple, even if the legal language behind it was complex. The jewels were expected to remain within carefully defined inheritance channels. They were to be preserved, protected, and eventually passed forward in accordance with principles established long before current palace disputes ever emerged. This expectation created a sense of permanence around the collection. Many within royal circles came to view the trust as untouchable, a settled matter that no future controversy could realistically challenge. That perception only strengthened as the years passed. Successive generations inherited not just responsibility for the jewels, but responsibility for the promise attached to them. The trust became a symbol of continuity, proof that certain commitments existed beyond personalities, rivalries, and temporary power struggles. It stood as a safeguard against uncertainty, reassuring those who valued tradition that some legacies would remain protected regardless of changing circumstances. Yet the very confidence that made the trust seem secure would eventually become part of the problem. Because when something is considered beyond question, people often stop asking questions altogether. Assumptions replace scrutiny. Expectations replace verification. And buried beneath decades of confidence, unanswered issues can quietly grow unnoticed until circumstances force them back into the light. As William continued examining the documents placed before him, he was beginning to discover that the story surrounding the Queen Mother's jewels was far more complicated than anyone had imagined. Yet somewhere between tradition and modern palace politics, questions began to emerge about whether those original intentions were still being honored. The moment William examined the trust records, the atmosphere reportedly changed. What appeared to be a routine inheritance review suddenly exposed inconsistencies that few had expected to find, forcing aides to confront questions nobody wanted to ask. The confidence that had surrounded the Queen Mother's private trust for decades began to fade almost immediately. Until that point, many within royal circles had treated the arrangement as settled history, something protected by tradition, reinforced by legal safeguards, and immune from controversy. Yet as documents were pulled from archives and reviewed alongside more recent records, subtle irregularities reportedly began to emerge. They were not dramatic discoveries at first. They appeared as small details, overlooked references, and conflicting interpretations buried within pages of paperwork. But inside institutions built on precedent and precision, even the smallest inconsistency can trigger enormous concern. What followed was a financial and legal review that quickly expanded beyond its original scope. Palace administrators reportedly ordered a closer examination of the trust structure, hoping to clarify lingering questions before they evolved into something more serious. Instead, the deeper investigators looked, the more uncertainty they encountered. Documents that seemed straightforward on one page appeared far less clear on another. Records concerning authority, oversight, and responsibility raised fresh concerns about how certain decisions had been made over the years. What had initially been viewed as a routine verification process was gradually becoming an investigation into the very foundations of the arrangement itself. As advisors worked through the growing volume of material, reports began circulating about discrepancies involving access and control. Nobody could agree on whether these issues reflected simple misunderstandings or something far more significant. Some argued that the trust remained fully intact and that concerns were being exaggerated. Others believed the emerging questions demanded immediate attention. The debate quickly shifted from technical discussions to broader concerns about accountability. If the trust existed to preserve a royal legacy, then who carried the responsibility for ensuring those protections remained intact? And if uncertainties existed, why had they remained hidden for so long? Those questions created a growing sense of unease among senior advisors. Meetings reportedly became longer and increasingly tense. Legal terminology that had once seemed routine was now being examined word by word. Every interpretation appeared to carry major consequences. Some officials focused on ownership, attempting to determine who possessed legal authority over the collection. Others insisted the issue was never about ownership at all. They argued that the jewels belonged to a larger legacy, and that stewardship, not possession, should remain the central principle guiding every decision. The disagreement revealed a deeper divide within palace thinking, one that extended far beyond the collection itself. Faced with mounting uncertainty, William reportedly sought clarification from trusted legal experts with experience navigating royal trusts and inheritance structures. He wanted answers that were clear, defensible, and rooted in the original purpose of the arrangement. Yet, even among specialists, consensus proved difficult to achieve. Interpretations varied, opinions differed. What should have been a straightforward review became a maze of competing arguments, each carrying implications capable of reshaping long-standing assumptions. Meanwhile, palace insiders described tension spreading throughout royal circles. Conversations grew more guarded, alliances quietly formed. Individuals who once viewed the matter as an administrative concern now understood that its outcome could influence future questions of authority, responsibility, and influence within the monarchy itself. The deeper William looked, the more he realized he was no longer dealing with paperwork alone. He was confronting a situation where history, loyalty, and power had become tightly intertwined. And as the final pieces slowly fell into place, one reality became impossible to ignore. As answers slowly emerged, William realized that resolving the issue would require confronting someone at the very center of royal power. For years, William had carefully avoided public confrontations within the family. But this situation was different. To him, the issue was no longer about personalities. It was about protecting a royal legacy that had been entrusted to future generations. By the time the questions surrounding the Queen Mother's trust reached their most critical stage, William reportedly understood that remaining silent was no longer an option. The deeper he looked into the matter, the clearer the stakes became. This was not simply a disagreement over valuable jewels or conflicting interpretations of old documents. It had evolved into something much larger. At its heart was a question that has shaped royal history for centuries. Who bears the responsibility of protecting a legacy when that legacy appears vulnerable? For William, the answer seemed increasingly obvious. Duty had to come before comfort. Responsibility had to come before relationships. Those close to palace operations reportedly noticed a shift in his approach. In previous years, William had often worked behind the scenes, preferring careful diplomacy over open conflict. He understood the dangers of public family disputes and the damage they could cause to the institution he would one day lead. Yet this situation challenged that instinct. The trust had been established to preserve something precious for future generations. If concerns existed about whether its original purpose was being upheld, ignoring those concerns would itself become a failure of duty. That realization weighed heavily on him as discussions intensified. In the weeks that followed, William reportedly entered a series of consultations with senior royal advisors. Legal specialists, constitutional experts, and trusted palace figures were all drawn into the conversation. Each brought a different perspective, but a common theme began emerging. The issue could no longer be treated as a temporary misunderstanding. Questions regarding obligations attached to the trust demanded clear answers. What responsibilities existed? Who was expected to uphold them? And what would happen if those expectations were ignored? The more these discussions unfolded, the more difficult it became to avoid a formal response. At the same time, pressure was quietly building from another direction. Traditionalists within royal circles reportedly viewed the situation with growing concern. To them, the matter extended far beyond a single collection of jewels. They feared the consequences of allowing uncertainty to surround an arrangement that had long been regarded as sacred. If exceptions could be made here, where would it end? If established protections could be questioned, what message would that send about other royal legacies entrusted to future generations? These concerns transformed a private issue into a symbolic battle over continuity and tradition. The atmosphere inside royal circles became increasingly divided. Some believed caution should prevail, arguing that any confrontation risked creating unnecessary turmoil. Others insisted that delay would only deepen the problem. Behind closed doors, Alliances reportedly formed around competing visions of how the matter should be handled. The debate was no longer confined to legal documents. It had become a test of principles, loyalty, and authority. Eventually, a decision was reached. After weeks of review, consultation, and internal debate, William reportedly concluded that the issue had to be addressed directly. The questions surrounding the trust could not remain unresolved. Whatever discomfort might follow, clarity was necessary. The choice marked a turning point. For the first time, what had begun as a quiet review threatened to become an unmistakable challenge to someone, occupying one of the most influential positions within the royal family. As word of William's determination spread through palace circles, the divide became impossible to ignore. Supporters rallied behind competing interpretations. Long-standing loyalties were tested. Private conversations grew tense. And at the center of it all stood a growing realization that the next move could alter relationships throughout the monarchy. What had started as an investigation into a legacy was becoming a confrontation that nobody could avoid. What followed would send shockwaves through royal households and force Camilla into an uncomfortable position. When the directive was finally delivered, even seasoned palace staff were stunned. Few expected William to act so decisively, and even fewer expected the request itself, to return jewels connected to one of the monarchy's most protected private trusts. For weeks, rumors had moved quietly through royal corridors, growing stronger with every closed-door meeting and every unanswered question. Yet many still believed the matter would ultimately be resolved through private discussions, carefully managed compromises, and the kind of discreet negotiations that had long defined palace life. That assumption shattered the moment the formal communication was reportedly delivered. What had once been a complicated internal review was now an unmistakable directive. The issue was no longer theoretical. It was no longer hidden within legal opinions and confidential consultations. A clear position had been taken, and the consequences would reach far beyond the collection itself. According to palace whispers, the requirement contained within the communication left little room for interpretation. The jewels connected to the Queen Mother's trust were expected to be returned to the protections originally established for them. For William and those who supported his position, the matter centered on preserving the purpose of the trust and ensuring that legacy remained intact. To them, the request reflected duty rather than confrontation. Yet to others, it represented something far more dramatic. It signaled a willingness to challenge long-standing assumptions and reopen questions that many believed had already been settled. The reaction among courtiers was reportedly immediate. Some were surprised by the firmness of the decision. Others were shocked that the issue had advanced to such a formal stage at all. Conversations spread rapidly throughout palace offices. Advisors exchanged opinions. Staff members who normally remained distant from royal disputes suddenly found themselves discussing the implications of a conflict that seemed to touch the very foundations of authority and inheritance. The atmosphere became charged with uncertainty. Nobody knew exactly what would happen next, but everyone understood that something significant had changed. As news of the directive circulated internally, debate intensified behind palace walls. Supporters of William argued that protecting the trust was essential for preserving confidence in royal stewardship. Critics questioned whether the situation was being handled in the most effective way. Beneath those competing views lay a deeper concern that few were willing to express openly. The dispute was beginning to raise uncomfortable questions about authority itself. Who ultimately had the power to determine how such legacies should be managed? Where did responsibility end and influence begin? And what would this confrontation reveal about the future balance of power within the monarchy? Those questions quickly expanded beyond private discussions. Whispers began finding their way to journalists, commentators, and longtime royal observers. Reports remained vague, but speculation intensified. Fragments of information emerged from different directions, each adding fuel to growing public curiosity. The possibility of a serious disagreement involving one of the monarchy's most treasured legacies captured attention precisely because so little was being officially acknowledged. Silence, in many ways, became part of the story. Meanwhile, royal insiders reportedly began speculating about the broader consequences. Some believed the directive would strengthen William's position as a future guardian of the institution. Others feared it could deepen divisions within the family at an already sensitive moment. Every possible outcome seemed to carry risks. Every decision appeared capable of reshaping relationships that had been carefully maintained for years. What made the situation especially unsettling was the growing realization that the jewels themselves might no longer be the central issue. They had become symbols in a much larger struggle involving influence, tradition, and the future direction of the monarchy. And while public attention slowly gravitated toward the order and its implications, those closest to the unfolding drama understood that the real conflict had not yet reached its most difficult stage. The directive may have started the confrontation, but what happened afterward would determine who emerged stronger, who found themselves isolated, and how far each side was willing to go to defend its position. But while attention focused on the order itself, an even bigger battle was quietly unfolding behind closed doors. For Camilla, the situation was far more complicated than headlines suggested. The jewels carried enormous symbolic value, and surrendering them risked creating an image of defeat at a time when palace dynamics were already shifting. From the outside, many observers viewed the dispute as a straightforward question of inheritance and trust obligations. But inside royal circles, the matter carried layers of meaning that extended far beyond legal documents and administrative decisions. The jewels at the center of the controversy were tied to history, status, and continuity. They represented connections to previous generations and served as reminders of the delicate balance of influence that exists within the monarchy. For Camilla, the growing pressure surrounding their future reportedly felt less like a procedural review and more like a challenge to her position during a period when every move inside the palace was being examined with unusual intensity. Reports from royal insiders suggested that her reaction was one of deep frustration mixed with growing concern. What made the situation particularly difficult was the symbolism attached to the collection itself. The jewels were no longer being discussed merely as treasured possessions. They had become a public representation of competing visions about duty, authority, and legacy. Every conversation about the trust seemed to carry an unspoken question about who should shape the monarchy's future. As that perception spread, the stakes grew significantly higher. Those close to the unfolding drama reportedly understood that reputation had become a central concern. Royal influence is often measured not only by official roles but also by perception. Appearances matter, signals matter, and in an institution built upon centuries of tradition, symbolic setbacks can sometimes feel as consequential as practical ones. The possibility of returning the jewels risked creating an image that many believed would be difficult to ignore. To some observers, it could be interpreted as a concession. To others, it might suggest a shift in authority toward a new generation increasingly determined to define its own direction. As pressure intensified, supporters reportedly moved to defend Camilla's position. Arguments emerged emphasizing complexity, interpretation, and context. Some believed the issue was being oversimplified. Others argued that the situation involved nuances that could not easily be captured by public speculation. Yet despite those efforts, the atmosphere continued to change. What had once been a private dispute increasingly felt like a broader struggle involving influence within the royal household itself. That shift created a growing sense of isolation in certain palace circles. Individuals who had previously remained neutral reportedly found themselves choosing sides. Long-standing relationships became strained. Conversations that once focused on cooperation became shaped by caution and uncertainty. The divide was not always visible, but it was increasingly difficult to ignore. Every development seemed to deepen existing tensions, pulling different factions further apart as they waited to see how events would unfold. Caught in the middle of this increasingly complicated situation was King Charles. For him, the conflict reportedly carried a unique burden. On one side stood William, motivated by what he believed was a responsibility to protect a legacy entrusted to future generations. On the other stood Camilla, facing growing scrutiny and difficult questions about influence, symbolism, and authority. The king was no stranger to balancing competing interests, but this dispute touched deeply personal territory. It involved family, tradition, and the future stability of the institution he represented. Meanwhile, royal observers watched every development with increasing fascination. Speculation spread rapidly. Analysts debated potential outcomes. Commentators searched for clues hidden within public appearances, private meetings, and carefully worded statements. Yet despite all the attention focused on the dispute, the most important decision had not yet been made. Because as pressure continued mounting from every direction, the center of gravity slowly shifted away from William and Camilla and toward the one figure whose choice could determine the final outcome. As pressure mounted, attention turned toward the king himself and the choice he could no longer avoid. King Charles had spent years balancing duty, family, and public responsibility. Now, those worlds were colliding. The dispute over the Queen Mother's jewels threatened to become a defining test of his reign. By the time the controversy reached its most critical stage, King Charles reportedly understood that the issue could no longer be managed through quiet conversations and cautious delays. What had begun as a private review of a historic trust had evolved into a challenge that touched nearly every sensitive corner of royal life. Family relationships were under strain. Palace factions had emerged. Public curiosity was growing. And at the center of it all stood a monarch facing one of the most difficult dilemmas of his reign. Every path forward appeared to carry consequences. Every decision risked disappointing someone whose loyalty and support mattered deeply. Reports suggest Charles was regularly informed about the escalating tensions as advisors attempted to keep him updated on developments. The briefings were said to be increasingly complex. Legal questions mixed with emotional considerations. Institutional concerns collided with personal relationships. What made the situation particularly difficult was that each side believed it was acting in defense of something important. William remained focused on preserving a legacy he believed had been entrusted to future generations. Others argued that broader considerations had to be taken into account. The result was a conflict, with no easy solution and no obvious path toward compromise. As pressure mounted, advisors reportedly began advocating very different approaches. Some believed a decisive resolution was necessary to restore clarity and confidence. They warned that uncertainty surrounding the trust could undermine the principles it was designed to protect. Others urged caution, fearing that any dramatic move could deepen divisions and create long-term consequences for family relationships. The king found himself surrounded by competing voices, each convinced their advice offered the best route forward. Yet the more opinions he received, the more difficult the decision became. Throughout the crisis, one concern remained constant: the importance of preserving royal unity. For generations, the monarchy had relied upon the appearance of stability during periods of internal strain. Charles reportedly understood that public confidence depended not only on constitutional duties, but also on the perception that the institution remained cohesive. The growing dispute threatened that image. Every rumor, every leak, and every whispered report risked turning a private disagreement into a public spectacle. That possibility weighed heavily as discussions continued behind closed doors. At the same time, the obligations attached to the trust could not simply be ignored. The collection had been protected for a reason. It represented a promise made across generations, a commitment designed to outlast changing circumstances and shifting personalities. Charles reportedly spent considerable time considering those responsibilities and what honoring them might require. The challenge was finding a way to respect the purpose of the trust without creating damage elsewhere. It was a delicate balancing act, one made even more difficult by the growing attention surrounding the issue. Fear of public fallout added another layer of pressure. Royal observers were already watching closely. Journalists continued searching for clues. Speculation intensified with every passing week. The longer uncertainty remained, the greater the risk that the story would grow beyond anyone's control. Palace insiders reportedly understood this reality all too well. Delay was becoming its own kind of decision, and not necessarily a safe one. Meanwhile, William's position remained unchanged. Despite growing tension and competing arguments, he reportedly continued to insist that the core issue was about responsibility, not personal rivalry. His determination signaled that the matter would not simply fade away. If anything, his resolve strengthened momentum toward a final outcome. Gradually, attention shifted away from debate and toward resolution. The moment of choice was approaching, and everyone involved seemed to sense it. The atmosphere throughout royal circles became charged with anticipation. Supporters of different positions waited anxiously. Advisors prepared for the consequences. Relationships hung in the balance. What had started as a question about a collection of jewels had transformed into a test of leadership, legacy, and authority. And when the long-awaited decision finally arrived, it carried implications far beyond the trust itself, setting the stage for a new chapter in the monarchy's evolving story. And when the decision finally came, it reshaped more than the fate of a collection. It reshaped the future balance of power within the monarchy. The jewels eventually returned to the place many believed they had always belonged. But by then, the story was no longer about gemstones or inheritance. It had become a powerful statement about who would define the monarchy's future. When the final resolution emerged, it carried a sense of inevitability that few could ignore. Months of uncertainty, speculation, private discussions, and growing tension had all led to this moment. What had started as a quiet review of historic trust records had transformed into one of the most closely watched internal disputes in recent royal memory. Yet in the end, the outcome was not measured by headlines or palace whispers. It was measured by what the decision represented. The return of the jewels signaled the conclusion of one battle, but it also revealed something much larger about the direction in which the monarchy was moving. For supporters of the original trust arrangement, the outcome was seen as a reaffirmation of the principles that had guided the collection for generations. The jewels were once again placed under the protections designed to preserve them, reinforcing the belief that certain legacies should remain insulated from changing circumstances and personal influence. To many observers, this was not simply a legal victory. It was a symbolic restoration of purpose. Trust had been created to safeguard history, and now that purpose appeared stronger than ever. At the center of that perception stood William. Throughout the dispute, he had reportedly framed the issue as one of stewardship rather than ownership, responsibility rather than privilege. Whether one agreed with his position or not, the outcome undeniably strengthened the image he had sought to project. He emerged not as someone pursuing personal advantage, but as a future monarch determined to protect what he believed had been entrusted to the crown. That distinction mattered. In royal life, symbolism often carries as much weight as action itself, and the symbolism surrounding this resolution was impossible to miss. At the same time, the Queen Mother's legacy seemed to gain renewed significance. Her name had remained a constant presence throughout the controversy, not because of any active role she played, but because the values associated with her trust continued to shape the debate long after her passing. What began as a discussion about jewelry ultimately became a conversation about continuity, preservation, and the obligations each generation inherits from those who came before. In that sense, her influence extended far beyond the collection itself. Yet the resolution also revealed subtle shifts within the royal family. Relationships remained intact, but the balance of influence appeared to be evolving. A new generation was stepping forward with increasing confidence, prepared to make difficult decisions even when those choices carried emotional consequences. The dispute exposed divisions, tested loyalties, and challenged assumptions that had existed for years. While the immediate conflict had ended, its effects would likely continue shaping palace dynamics long into the future. Public reaction reflected that deeper reality. Many people viewed the story through the lens of duty versus privilege. They saw a struggle between preserving a historic responsibility and protecting personal interests. Others focused on the broader message about accountability within one of the world's oldest institutions. Regardless of perspective, the debate resonated because it touched on universal themes: legacy, trust, family, and the difficult choices required to protect something larger than oneself. As the controversy faded from daily conversation, its significance remained. Future generations of royals would likely inherit not only the jewels but also the lessons attached to them. The dispute demonstrated how quickly questions of history can become questions of authority. It showed how symbols can evolve into battlegrounds. Most importantly, it revealed that the future of the monarchy would be shaped not only by tradition, but by those willing to defend it when challenged. The jewels were secured, the trust preserved, and the immediate conflict brought to an end. Yet inside the walls of the monarchy, many believed this was never really about jewelry at all. It was the first unmistakable sign that a new era of royal authority had already begun. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.